Good morning, fifth grade. Today we're going to read an article about two journalists who um, documented life in California in the 1930s. We're going to learn about Dorothy Lange and John Steinbeck. Before we begin, we need to complete our quick write that says, how do people in your family document important events so that they will be able to remember them years from now? Why is this an important practice? So, my family, we take a lot of pictures. Today, you might post them on Instagram or somewhere else on the internet just so that you'll be able to remember them. So you can write down what your family does to document important events. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for vocabulary. Our focus question for today is, how have Dorothy Lange and John Steinbeck made a lasting impression on our understanding of life in 1930s California? And so before we can answer this question, we've got three vocabulary words. The first one is document, and that's when you're collecting evidence for a specific purpose, right? And so we have this person who's like collecting evidence about a topic. We know he is because he's, writing something down. The second word is capture. This can have a bunch of different meanings, but for this purpose, it's when you put information in a form that someone can use or read. And so this person is capturing information with a camera so that other people will be able to see the pictures or the information that he's collecting. And then last is impression. It's that idea or feeling you have about someone, and that can just be formed through your interactions with them. And so I'm sure you've all heard of making a good first impression. And so these women are shaking hands, they're smiling, they're being polite, they're trying to make a good first impression. They're trying to make the other person think, good thoughts about them. All right, so we're going to get started with our reading. Turn in your text to the first page. And first, we want to collect evidence about how the author describes the change in California from 1850 to 1930. What was going on in California that caused a change? And so I'm at this first paragraph. By the time California became an American state in 1850, it was already an important place for farming. Miners, ranchers, and farmers had been settling there for decades due to the state's many types of geography. California had a population of 90,000 in 1850, and this grew to over 5 million by 1930. By the 20th century, California produced a lot more of the nation's fruits, vegetables, and other crops. So if we go back in this paragraph, we know that it tells us the population grew from 90,000 to 5 million between the time of 1850 and 1930. So make sure you have that sentence underlined, and we want to write our answer in box 1. California's population grew from 900,000 to 5 million between 1850 and 1930. Great. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for number 2. Then our author kind of starts talking about John Steinbeck, and so we want to collect some information about him. We want to know, how does the author view John Steinbeck, and how does the information later on in the 4th and 5th paragraphs support this idea, support the author's idea of John Steinbeck. All right, we're in the 2nd paragraph. When severe drought hit the Great Plains in the 1930s, many sought refuge in California. And we already knew this, right? Because we read our text, Okie Go Home. We know people left the Dust Bowl area and moved to California to become farmers. migrant laborers arrived in the United States with no work, and their families often went hungry. This disastrous time was captured by newspaper reporters, but it also lives on in history through novels and photographs. Two Californians in particular were exceptional at recording this hard period. Okay, and this sentence is really important. Go ahead and underline it. In this sentence, the author explicitly states the purpose for the text. He's going to tell us about two Californians who did a really good job at recording this period in history in 1930s California. And the first person he tells us about is John Steinbeck. And so we're going to collect evidence about how the author views John Steinbeck. We already know the author thinks he did an exceptional job at recording this time period in California. And we're going to continue reading to figure out who John Steinbeck is and what the author thinks about him. It says, John Steinbeck was born in Salinas, California in 1902. He attended Stanford University, also in California, though he did not graduate. Eventually, he moved to New York to become a writer, but he did not manage to get a career off the ground. He learned in his home state, where he started to write fiction about California and its people. Many of Steinbeck's most famous novels were short stories, and short stories were written in the 1930s during America's Great Depression. Even though they are fictional, his subjects often show what is happening in history at the time. His book, Tortilla Flat, focused on people living in the countryside in Monterey, California. All right, and so if we go back in this third paragraph, we want to think about, how does the author view John Steinbeck? And so we already said the author thinks he did an exceptional job recording history of the 1930s in California, but we also know how he recorded it. And our text says that he was a writer, and we know he wrote many famous novels and short stories about the Great Depression. So make sure you have this sentence underlined, many of Steinbeck's most famous novels. And so for 2A, we could say the author thinks John Steinbeck was an exceptional novelist or writer during the 1930s. Okay, and then in the next two paragraphs, we are going to look for evidence to support our answer. What other evidence does the author give us that lets us know John Steinbeck is exceptional? Okay, and here's our fourth paragraph. Tortilla Flat is a funny story about a group of friends mostly enjoying themselves, but Steinbeck's later books dealt with some more serious issues. In Dubious Battle, which the writer published in 1936, looks at migrant workers who picked fruit in California's orchards. The workers were striking for better working conditions. Steinbeck also used his work to show the life and hardships faced by California's migrant ranch workers. Of Mice and Men is his story about two such workers, Lenny and George, who make their way from one town to another in California looking for work. Their dream is to own their own land one day, but many obstacles make this difficult to achieve. Okay, and so we know that's one sentence in here that lets us know he did a good job recording history in the 1930s in California. Is he wrote, so the author tells us about 3 books he wrote, Tortilla Flat, Dubious Battle, and Of Mice and of Men. Are all books that show how hard life was like in the 1930s for migrant workers. Let's keep going and see if the next paragraph gives us similar evidence. Finally, Steinbeck's most famous novel about Californians is The Grapes of Wrath, published in 1939. Like some of Steinbeck's other stories, the book shows people facing poverty and hardship during the Great Depression. Underline that sentence. Like some of Steinbeck's other stories, this book shows people facing poverty and hardships during the Great Depression. In the novel, a family of tenant farmers, the Joads, moves from Oklahoma to California after a drought leaves them too poor to farm. They are forced to become migrant laborers in order to survive. All right, and now we've learned the Grapes of Wrath also talks about the hardships that California's migrant laborers faced. And so for 2B, when it asks us, for information that supports the author's ideas about Steinbeck, we know that we could say many of Steinbeck's novels show how people in California in the 1930s faced poverty and hardship during the Great Depression. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for number 3. All right, we're at the 6th paragraph, and I want you to listen to a shift in the topic that the author's telling us about. It says, Steinbeck's novels showed fictional versions of the very real problems people in California faced during the 1930s. In contrast, the photographs of Dorothy Lange offer real-life examples of hardship. Lange was born in New Jersey in 1895. As a young adult, she settled in San Francisco, California. She had decided in high school to become a photographer, and at first she ran her own studio where she took people's portraits. Okay, I hope you heard the shift. At the first sentence, the author is talking about Steinbeck and how he wrote fictional novels about real problems. But then in the next sentence, boxing this phrase in contrast, he talks about another person, Dorothy Lange, and how she took photographs that were real-life examples of hardship. And so when we're thinking about this shift for box 3, we could say the author shifts from describing Steinbeck's fictional novels to introducing Dorothy Lange's photographs. And then it asks, why might the author do this? Well, if we go, if we're thinking about the author's purpose from paragraph 2, we know that the author told us at the very beginning that he was going to describe 2 Californians that were exceptional at recording history. And so Dorothy Lange is the second person he's going to talk about. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for number 4. We are in paragraph 7, and we want to know how does the author view Dorothy Lange? During the 1920s, Lange traveled with her first husband, Maynard Dixon, around the southwestern United States. She began to take pictures of people and places in what is called documentary-style photography because of the way it documented people's lives. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, she began to take many more photos of the poor in order to illustrate the many problems they face. She started with what she saw right in San Francisco and took pictures of striking laborers and people waiting in bread lines. All right, and so 4A asks us, based on the information in the 7th paragraph, how does the author view Dorothy Lange? And we already know from the 2nd paragraph that the author thinks Dorothy Lange is exceptional, and now we know how she's exceptional. The author lets us know Dorothy Lange was exceptional at documentary-style photography because she documented the lives of poor people during the Great Depression. Press pause to write down your answer, and then you need to silently read the last 2 paragraphs to get your answer for 4B.